Rocket Writers of the 27th Century proudly brings to you the following short story set 3 years after the Calypso Incident. The Shadow of Red Claw. Written for you by author Michael Moreau. Narrated by Mark Roddy. The Honshu exited NC just outside the known orbit of Tamid C's single moon. As she passed the large rocky satellite, Faust flipped her around and began rapid deceleration with the ship's main engines. The contract was a pedestrian one, delivering supplies to a fledgling colony of Antarian settlers. Thus, only Faust, Fizril, and the captain were in the cockpit. It was 2200 hours by the ship's chronometer, and their arrival at the colony would be during night hours, so Tarsik had given most of the crew the go-ahead to catch some shut-eye. The captain tapped his fingers impatiently against the surface of his console. The rumble of the engines always put him at peace, so he couldn't wait to get surface side and be able to tuck in for a quick nap like everyone else. Even Fizril yawned and brought up a hand to rub his eyes. In a few moments, the mighty blue rocket would illuminate the buildings of the colony below, probably even shake a few window shutters before coming to a rest on the landing pad where she would sit, silent, for another 6 hours or so until dawn. Normally, Tarsik preferred to keep moving, but Gal X's introduction onto the scene had put a dent into the number of available contracts for service ships. Their next job didn't even start for another 3.5 days, so there was no reason to wake the colonists up to unload in the middle of the night. They'd likely remain dirtside for another day or so anyway for a bit of R&R. Ensel had already taken the liberty of researching Tamid C and discovered a reportedly great fishing spot only a few clicks from the settlement. Tarsik was unsure what exactly it was that his Martian first officer found so enthralling about the process, but he still looked forward to a relaxing afternoon with his closest friend and a few beers out in the fresh air. Even a dyed-in-the-wool spacer like Tarsik could appreciate the loveliness of a lush world like Tamid. At least in small doses. An incoming telewave alert from Fizril's operations console broke the silence and perked them all up a bit. The captain raised an eyebrow questioningly, then nodded for the big cat to put the call through. The officer tapped a few keys and the screen in front of him crackled to life. Tarsik noticed his ears go back as the image began to clarify. The face on the screen triggered a memory for Fizril. Sitting amongst the branches of the big old bodant tree on the south lawn of the Lyceum that he had attended in his young adulthood. There, with harsh rays of orange-red sunlight filtering through the leaves of the giant genetically engineered tree that had been grown as an outdoor classroom, and with the ultra-thin dark gray skyscrapers of the city rising up all around them, the students had listened to the lectures of the heavily grain and eminently portly Professor Surson. Shant Sir, that was his name. Fizzle remembered him causing disturbances often, but one event stuck out in his mind. Shant Sir had been part of a fringe movement on campus known as the Brotherhood, which asserted that the matriarchal domination of the Antarian people was unnatural, and that a patriarchal system, like that of ancient times, should be reinstated. The brothers had liked to stand in the plaza and shout things at passers-by, railing hard against the tradition of shunning hyper-aggressive males, proclaiming the practice a creation of the liberal female sciences that offered no benefit to Antarians as a race. Being one of the few male teachers, Hassurson had been challenged by the Brotherhood less than other professors on campus. But one afternoon in particular, Fizril recalled Shant Sir and one of his friends harassing the professor for bringing up the commonly accepted notion that Antarians had not evolved on Antares Vive, but had rather been placed there by progenitor species. In fact, he had been so vehement in his rejection of the entire notion that it had gotten him expelled from class, and he'd nearly come to blows with the old professor. At the time, Fizril had believed the Brotherhood to be little more than the nonsense of a few radical individuals, but he was well aware from the recent news broadcast that in time since his school days that they had proven to be much more than that. They had in fact been the precursor to a growing terrorist insurgency that threatened the Antarian people's place in the Federated Worlds.
"His name is Shant Sir, sir,"
Fizril said to Captain Tarsik.
an outcast and political dissident.
Fizril, the snarling face on the screen said in response, using the archaic patriarchal naming convention. Never did I expect to see you in space. I thought surely you'd be back on the homeworld, an obedient husband, cowering in the collective shadow of your wives. The officer turned back to the screen and raised enough of his upper lip to reveal his canines.
At least females would have me, should I so choose, he replied.
At this, Chancellor appeared to fume.
Not now,
Tarsik whispered into Fizril's ear before leaning into view of the screen.
This is Captain Tarsik of the RS Honshu. Antarian politics are none of our concern. We're a service vessel on a contract to deliver supplies to the planet below. Tell me what I can help you with, or I'm ending this transmission.
The figure on the screen seemed displeased with the way he'd been spoken to. I'm aware of your destination, Captain. I'm also aware of your cargo. Chancellor spat as he said the last word. And that is why I waived you. Tarsik nearly shot back a remark about how his cargo was no one else's space-blasted business, but decided against it. He wanted to see where this was going. He motioned for the Antarian to continue. Part of your cargo is Gensaroot, yes? The captain recalled seeing Gensaroot named on the manifest when they'd picked up their load at Anaron Station.
Possibly,
he grunted. Chancellor leaned in closer to his screen. You are aware what it is used for.
As a matter of fact, I am not. That's not relevant to my contract. I am, however, quite aware of what that insignia on your collar means. I'm not in the habit of talking to terrorists, Chancellor.
The alien grew visibly perturbed by Tarsik's response, likely from hearing his own name pronounced in the modern fashion, the captain thought. It is used. The Antarian tried to compose himself, but still spoke angrily. As a means of sterilizing those males who are deemed overly aggressive by the matriarchy. He sat back a bit, then continued, still visibly agitated. This system is now under the authority of Red Claw and the Patriarchy. We will allow you to proceed with your delivery after you jettison the Gensaroot and submit to an inspection. Tarsik chuckled and spun to face Faust. He made a hand signal that told her to mute the transmission.
You know this guy?
He asked Fizril.
Unfortunately, I do, Captain.
The Antarian replied plainly.
Am I right in believing the hearsay about Red Claw? Will they resort to violence as quickly as the news blasts insinuate?
Without question. There is good reason why aggressive Nantarian males are shunned from society. Tarsik tried to formulate a response to that statement, but was unable to. He nodded, turned back to Faust.
Emily, anything on the scopes?
The pilot knew what he was asking. She ran her hands over the keys that would activate a full sensor scan. A moment later, her answer came. Nothing that I can see, sir. If they've got ships out there, they're either powered down completely or using some kind of stealth tech. After the whole Calypso fiasco, Tarsik wasn't about to rule out the possibility that a fringe terrorist group like Red Claw had managed to get their hands on stealth screens.
What about the signal itself? Can you trace its origin?
No, sir, she replied. And I'm still not having any luck raising the colony either. They may be jamming.
Yeah, or they're already down there, Tarsik sighed.
He leaned back over in Fizril and pressed the button on the operations console that would restore the voice of the visibly shouting head of the screen.
My final warning. Comply with my orders, or we will open fire on your ship. With what exactly?
Tarsik quipped.
You have no ships in orbit, and the colony doesn't have any weapons. You will see,
Shant Sir purred. He snarled, revealing what looked like to be silver-plated canines. Then, the screen went black.
Well,
Tarsik said to no one in particular.
Guess he called my bluff.
Then to Fizril.
Run a detailed scan of the colony, and everything within 20 clicks of it. I want to know if anyone is down there that shouldn't be.
The captain rubbed at his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. What's with his teeth? The pilot asked her feline colleague.
Artificial ones,
the operations officer started, working the controls in front of him.
It is a custom of my people to defang hyper-aggressive males, to make them less suitable as mates, so that their genes are not passed on.
Wow, Ensel said, stepping from the lift. Everyone turned to look at him. What? All I caught was Fizril talking about ripping teeth out. Are we telling stories? Tarsik shot him a look that said, Not now. This may be serious.
We just got a wave,
the captain explained,
from some Red Claw fanatic by the name of Shant Sir, telling us to come about and heave to, or he'll open fire on us.
Ensel glanced about the cockpit curiously. With what? He remarked wryly, and then with a smile, Are we surrounded? We're still trying to figure that one out, Faust admits. Just then, Fizril spoke up.
Visual search with the ship's scopes reveals one vessel on the surface, 3 kilometers from the settlement. Put it up on screen,
Tarsik instructed. A few key presses later, and an aerial view of a clearing in the forest below materialized on the display. Fizril zoomed in on it a couple of times until the silhouette of a gray rocket was easy to distinguish against the green vegetation. Zorodian Perlon 3. No. Perlon 5 class transport, Ensel said, then grinned. You can tell by the larger rear fins.
Indeed,
the operations officer acknowledged as he matched the image to records in the ship's data tapes. That's what, a 15-man short-range interstellar? Ensel asked.
14,
Tarsik corrected him.
That's more than enough to take a defenseless colony like Tamid.
Hold, Fizril said as he continued working. A moment later, the orbital image was overlaid by an infrared scan.
There is a great deal of residual heat around the craft, and no large thermal signatures between it and the settlement. They appear to have set down recently. Prepping for a nighttime assault,
Tarsik nodded. Well, that's just rude, Ensel smirked.
Let's make sure that doesn't happen. We've got them outnumbered nearly 3-1.
The captain reached for the mic that hung over his console and was about to rouse the crew when a warning erupted from the cockpit speakers. Incoming! Faust shouted.
Incoming?
Tarsik back.
Aye, said Fizril. Reading 3 torpedoes at bearing 290. Closing fast. Time to impact? 15 seconds. Faust!
On it! She shouted over the already increasing roar of the engines. The captain and the XO braced themselves against Tarsik's console as the ship heaved under their feet.
Activate point defense turrets,
was the captain's next order. It took no more than a second for Fizril to perform the action and acknowledge his captain.
Point defense cannons firing on torpedoes.
The cockpit was deathly silent for the next few moments, save for the thrum of the rockets before the Antarian spoke again.
Splash number 1. Splash number 3. Splash number 2.
He turned to face the others.
All torpedoes neutralized.
Faust backed off of the throttle and the extraneous G-forces leveled out.
Where in the hell did that come from?
Tarsik demanded sternly.
I'm analyzing the vectors now, sir,
Fizril replied. Stealth tech? Ensel asked his captain.
I'm not ruling anything out.
The operations officer interjected.
Vector analysis reveals that the torpedoes appeared on our sensors here.
He pointed to an image on his screen. The captain and first officer approached and leaned over to more closely examine the data. That doesn't make sense, Ensel muttered.
It makes perfect sense,
Tarsik said, giving Ensel a look. The Martian's face twisted into a sarcastic expression. That a moon shot 3 torpedoes at us. Tarsik tapped his own head.
That someone left 3 torpedoes in orbit.
Oh, Ensel grinned. I'm afraid not, boys, Faust called out. They both looked over to see her looking particularly smug. Logs show no EM signals from the planet since we arrived in orbit. Well, then who in the space-blasted hell activated those damn things? Ensel asked. Tarsik rubbed his chin in thought. He walked back to his console, the metal plates in his boots ringing against the floor in the quiet space as he did so. After a moment, he looked up and then ran his gaze over those present.
The same person who sent the communique. Shan't, sir.
A wry smile appeared on his face.
He's not on the planet. He's on the damned moon. How would that shield his telewave from our efforts to triangulate his location, Captain?
Fizril asked. Ensel chimed in. Old spacer's trick. Send your wave while parked inside a crater with the right shape, and it'll diffuse the signal. Makes it real hard to triangulate.
Mm-hmm,
Tarsik agreed.
I see. And they could have activated the torpedoes with a tight beam transmission,
the big cat replied. Aw, shit, speak of the devil, Faust exclaimed. The deck once again heaved as the pilot punched the powerful neutron rockets to full throttle.
3 more incoming. Activating point defense,
Fizril announced. Ensel shot the captain a look that said, How many damn torpedoes did they drop? The turrets along the hull of the great blue rocket spat fiery proton bolts into the darkness. One found its mark and a single torpedo shattered into bits, its passing into non-existence signaled by a little more than a brief flash of light.
Splash 1.
Twice a second the cannons pulsed, and after several seconds one struck another of the torpedoes. It was a glancing blow, one that the metal casing of the weapon easily shrugged off, but a subsequent hit tore it apart.
Splash 2.
As the incoming torpedo closed in on the Honshu, the captain roared over the howl of the engines.
Fizril, Faust, talk to me.
Damn it, I'm trying, was all the pilots shouted back. One of the glowing bolts screaming into the darkness tore into the guidance computer of the last torpedo, causing it to spiral out of control madly.
This one's gonna be close,
Tarsik gasped, then grabbed the mic and yelled into it.
All hands, brace for impact!
The nearly half-megaton pressure wave of the Antarian torpedo reached out in all directions but only managed to gently rock its intended target. Check your shorts, everyone! Ensel beamed, finding his footing as the ship stopped bucking beneath his feet.
Ensel, stow it!
Tarsik stated flatly as he immediately turned his attention to his console.
Pilot, bring us around until our nose is pointed at that moon.
Aye, sir, she said. Then a few seconds later, What are you planning?
To flush some quail,
he said with a glint in his eye. Using the controls in front of him, Tarsik had the torpedo bay's autoloader summon the weapon he had nicknamed Big Baby. It was an ultra-high-yield atomic warhead mated to their fastest axial torpedo body.
Come out and play, you son of a bitch.
The torpedoes that the Honshu carried were fast new axial torpedoes. The combination of the electromagnetic and nitrogen gas launcher was capable of launching them at over 2,000 meters per second, and that was before their own rocket motor even kicked in. As the weapon screamed its way toward the rocky moon, Tarsik's finger hovered over the button that would detonate it just shy of the surface. He watched intently as the altitude meter counted down. At just over a kilometer from impact, he pushed the button and they all watched through the cockpit windows as a bright flash lit up a significant portion of the small satellite's surface.
"Scan for drive plumes,"
the captain said softly, his gaze still fixed on the explosion. Fizril acknowledged and set upon the task, but a moment later his console beeped as a communique came through. He triangulated the signal and focused the scanners on its source. Ansel, Faust, and Tarsik all angled to see what he was pulling up on his screen.
"Wave incoming, sir," he said. "It's an Antarian Furkan, fast attack rocket. She is rising from the surface of the moon."
The captain and his first officer exchanged glances. "A Furkan?" Ansel beamed. "That's a beauty of a ship, but I've never seen one in person." Fizril chuckled to himself and then turned to the others.
"She may not be such a beauty anymore. She is venting atmosphere from several small hull ruptures and is lifting at only 1/3 power." "Great. A wounded predator,"
Tarsik remarked.
"Put the wave through to your station." "Aye."
The communication screen crackled to life once more, and Shant Sir's image returned to it. He appeared shaken. His fur was ruffled, and he seemed to be bleeding from a cut on his lip. Behind him, other Antarians were scrambling about with repair kits, and some of the ship's wiring was visibly dangling into their cockpit, emitting occasional sparks.
"Are you insane?"
Shant Sir howled. Tarsik grinned.
"No, I just don't respond well to threats. I'm not the one making illegal claims to a colony that's not mine." "Illegal?" the Antarian growled. "We are the legitimate rulers of the Empire." "The what now?" Tarsik smiled. "There is no Antarian Empire, Shancer. Hasn't been for quite some time now. Go home and stop playing soldier, okay?" "The audacity! How dare you!"
Tarsik cut him off.
"I dared to do whatever I damned well please, Shancer. I've got torpedo lock on your ship, and you're already not looking too hot."
Behind him, Ansel was giggling almost uncontrollably, but managed to keep it inaudible to the enemy captain.
"Now let me tell you exactly what's gonna happen next. You're gonna get that bucket of space bolts out of this system immediately, or I'm gonna reduce it and you to slag."
Shant Sir tried to object, but Tarsik just spoke over him.
"I wasn't finished,"
he insisted.
"You're gonna go back and tell your little terrorist friends that the colony below and the tainment system in general is now under the protection of the RS Honshu and the service. Tell them that if I so much as catch a whiff of their stench anywhere near this system again, I'm gonna shoot first and ask questions later."
The Red Claw commander seethed. He seemed to be trying to find the words to respond, but again, Tarsik did not give him the chance. He lifted up his right hand and made a dismissive gesture with his fingers.
"Run along, Shancer,"
pronouncing the name loudly and clearly. The Antarian bared his fangs for a moment, but then reached out and slapped the button that would terminate the telewave. The screen went back into power-saving mode. Everyone was quiet for a moment, despite the lights on several consoles blinking with warnings and intership communications. "So, we're gonna hang around here then?" Ansel asked the captain.
"Only as long as planned."
He put his hand on the Martian's shoulder.
"Rangers are expanding into this sector as we speak. And in the meantime, I'm sure the service will approve some patrol contracts to keep the system secure."
Then, to Fizril.
What about that ship on the surface? They are powering engines now. Good,
Tarsik said as he motioned for Ensel to follow him to the transport lift.
Make sure they actually do leave. Yes, sir,
Fizril replied respectfully. As they made for the lift, Faust began to check the inner ship. Cap? She called for his attention.
Yes, pilot?
It's Chef, sir, she said, holding the earpiece some distance from her ear and wincing. He wants to know why dinner is all over the bulkheads. At that point, she couldn't help but laugh.
We will go down there and talk to him right away.
Hi, sir. She smiled and waved them off. The end.